Hello everybody, this presentation is for my Year 12 Mathematics students. This presentation, we're going back into Chapter 1 and we're focusing on inverses, which was the concept studied in Exercise 1F and to a certain extent also in 1G. Okay, so what we've got to do is we want to find the inverse of this function here. F of x is equal to x minus 3 plus 2. Now, if we were to draw that graph, let's see, it would start up at 3, 1, so we could say, and it would go up like that. Alright, now, let's see here. For an inverse, there are two parts to it. First of all, we need to swap the domain and the range, and we need to swap the x and the y. Now, let's figure out the domain and range of the original here. So, the domain and range of the original are, well, the domain. What's the domain of this? Well, anything under a square root always has to be greater than 0. So x always has to be greater than 3. So the domain is from 3 up to infinity. And the range, well, even though it says here that the codomain is all real numbers, our graph, because it's been moved up 1, will have a range from 1 to infinity. Now for the inverse, what we've got to do is we've got to swap the domain and swap the range over. That means the domain of our inverse will be from 1 to infinity, and the range of our inverse will be from 3 to infinity. So there's half the problem done, and if we were to write the inverse here, we can already write one part of it because we know the domain will be from 1 to infinity, and we know that should be a square bracket. Whoops, no, actually it should be a round bracket because it's infinity, and the range will be from 3 up to infinity. Now let's see if we can figure out what the inverse will be equal to. So we've got to swap the positions of the x and the y. So if this is in place of the y, we'd have y is equal to square root of x plus 1. Now if we swap the x and the y, swap, we'd have x is equal, to square root of y minus 3 plus 1. Well, that means that if we switch this 1 around, we'd have x minus 1 is equal to y minus 3. And then if we squared both sides, we'd have x minus 1 squared is equal to y minus 3. And then if we took this minus 3 to the other side, we'd have y is equal to x minus 1 squared plus 3. And that would be the equation for the inverse. X minus 1 squared plus 3. And if you think about this, where we're graphing it, it would be moved 1 across to the right and 3 up. So its starting point here would be 1, 3, and it would go up like this. And then, if we were to draw the line y equals x through it, as y equals x, the inverse up here and the original down here would be mirror images of each other in the line y equals x. Alrighty, we'll try one more. Okay, so here's the next one. Now this equation or this graph is a hyperbola, and what we want to do is to find the inverse of this hyperbola. So again, what we'll do is we'll swap the domain and range, and we'll also swap the x and y values. Now let's think about this. The domain of the original, well, the only x value we can't have here is on the bottom of a function. That graph can't be equal to 0, so x plus 2 can't be equal to 0. So x can't be equal to minus 2. So that means the domain can be all real numbers except for minus 2. And it could be all real numbers except for, now it's also moved down 3. It can be all real numbers except for. Okay, so there's the domain and the range. The domain of our graph here is all real numbers except for minus 2, and for the range, all real numbers except for minus 3. Now, we've got to swap them over, so the domain of the inverse will be all real numbers except for minus 3, and the range of the inverse will be all real numbers except for minus 2. Now we need to swap x and y. Now let's see. Our original graph is y is equal to 1. So if this is our original and we swap x and y, we'll have x is equal to 1 over y plus 2 minus 3. Now we'll take this minus 3 across to the other side, so we have x plus 3, and then we'll swap these two about, so that will come up there and that will go down there. Now you can do that algebraically and we can get y is equal to 1 over x plus 3 plus 2. Now if we need to write the equation for the inverse, we can say that the inverse will be all real numbers except for minus 3, just as it was up there, mapped onto all real numbers except for minus 2, and the equation for the inverse will be this one we worked over here before, x plus 3 plus minus 2. Sorry, that was an algebra mistake. Alrighty, so if you have any more questions about inverses, ask me in class and I'll see you then.